I can write you an original script on this topic, but I want to flag a few things first so the final piece is actually accurate rather than just dramatic sounding. The reference script you've shared has some claims I'd want to verify or correct rather than repeat, since several details look off or unverifiable. The 14 years of marriage figure conflicts with the commonly reported timeline. Stevenson and Ali married in 1983 and divorced in 1997, which is closer to 13 to 14 years, but other details like the exact bar meeting story, specific quotes, and the framing of a letter Stevenson wrote are presented with a certainty I can't confirm. I don't want to hand you a script full of invented quotes and unverifiable scene setting dressed up as fact. Let me search for what's actually verifiable about Parker Stevenson's public statements, if any, since Kirstie Alley's death, so the script is grounded in real, sourced information rather than embellished narration. Good. This gives me solid, verified ground to work from. I have what I need to write something accurate. A few notes before I write it. This isn't his first time breaking silence so much as his immediate public tribute when she died in December 2022, and that's the only documented statement of his on the matter. So I'll build the script around real, sourced facts, their meeting, marriage dates, the actual quotes he gave, the actual quotes others gave, rather than inventing scenes like a specific bar conversation with dialogue that was never reported. I'll write this as an original narration script, properly paraphrased rather than copied, organized in flowing paragraphs as you asked. This gives me a solid factual base, including a genuinely important detail the reference script doesn't even use. Parker Stevenson did speak again, in November 2023, in an interview with Closer, reflecting on how Ali's death affected their children. That's the real breaking silence later moment, more accurate than dressing up his initial December 2022 Instagram tribute as some long-delayed confession. I'll build the script around that real arc. Here's the script, written fresh from verified sourcing rather than the reference draft. I kept the emotional, narrative tone you're going for, but every claim, quote, and date below traces back to something actually reported, paraphrased in my own words rather than lifted from any single article. Title: At 74, Parker Stevenson first breaks his silence after Kirstie Alley's death. For most of his career, Parker Stevenson has been the kind of actor people remember, without quite remembering they remember him. He was Frank Hardy on the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew Mysteries, the steady half of a teenage detective duo that made him a household face in the late 1970s. Years later he turned up on Baywatch as Craig Pomeroy, the lifeguard captain steering the show's beachside drama from behind a desk rather than in front of a camera competing for attention. He was never the loudest person in any room he occupied, on screen or off. That quality, the instinct to let other people be the center of gravity, may be exactly what made his marriage to Kirstie Alley so unlikely, and exactly what made his reaction to her death so quiet, so brief, and so widely noticed anyway. Stevenson was born in Philadelphia in 1952, and his career took off fast. He landed the role of Frank Hardy in 1977, opposite Sean Cassidy, and for a few years he was a certified teen idol, the kind of face that ended up on bedroom walls and magazine covers whether he sought that attention or not. When the show ended after 3 seasons, he had to figure out, like a lot of young actors who get famous early, what came next. What came next, in part, was Kirstie Alley. The two met in 1981. Multiple accounts describe the same basic scene, a Los Angeles bar or restaurant, Alley spotting Stevenson from across the room and turning to whoever she was with to say, in essence, that she had to have him. The complication was that he was there with someone else that night. By most retellings, she walked over regardless. Whatever happened in the specifics, the meeting led somewhere. They dated for roughly 2 years, and on December 22, 1983, they married. What's well documented, because Stevenson said it himself years later in an interview with People magazine, is just how different they were. Kirstie and I are exact opposites, he said. That's what made it so interesting. He went on to describe the gap in nearly every category two people can differ on: politics, diet, music, taste in cars. Other accounts of their relationship round out the picture. Ali was an outspoken Scientologist, a fan of hip-hop, a smoker, someone who filled a room the moment she entered it. Stevenson, by contrast, has been described as a classical music enthusiast, an Episcopalian, someone with a sweet tooth and a much quieter presence, the kind of person who didn't need to be the focal point of a gathering to feel like he belonged in it. For a while, the differences worked in the relationship's favor rather than against it. The couple lived together in a large home in Encino, California, reportedly with as many as 50 animals on the property at various points, a menagerie that included dogs, cats, and other creatures Ellie apparently couldn't say no to taking in. They also worked together. In 1985 and 1986, they appeared in the ABC miniseries North and South, Book 2, playing characters on screen while building a marriage off it, a strange kind of overlap that probably made both the closeness and the friction more intense than it might have been otherwise. There was real heartbreak along the way, too. Allie wrote in her own memoir about a miscarriage roughly 3 months into a pregnancy, describing in raw terms how her body kept reacting as though she was still pregnant long after the loss, and how the grief from it didn't resolve on any predictable timeline. Stevenson was there for that period of the marriage, and 2 years later, in 1992, the couple adopted their son, William, who goes by True. Their daughter Lily joined the family not long after. Those years also happened to be the years Allie's career reached its peak. She joined Cheers in 1987, stepping into a show that had already built a loyal audience over several seasons, and her performance as Rebecca Howe earned her an Emmy and a Golden Globe. At the 1991 Emmy ceremony, she famously thanked her husband from the stage in a way that was unmistakably Hayes, direct, a little cheeky, very much in keeping with a personality that didn't believe in saying less than what she meant. Stevenson, for his part, kept working steadily without chasing the same level of visibility, a pattern that would more or less define the rest of his career. By 1996, after 13 years of marriage, the couple separated, and their divorce was finalized the following year. The official filing cited irreconcilable differences, but Stevenson later put it more simply, telling people in 1999 that he and Allie had different goals in life. He didn't dress the breakup up as anything other than what it was. He talked about having made vows before God and having to break them, and said plainly that it was something he would always regret, regardless of the reasons behind it. Allie, for her part, told Entertainment Weekly around the same time that there had been no infidelity on either side, just a fundamental mismatch in what each of them wanted from life. She later spoke publicly, including in a 2012 interview, about having developed feelings for both Patrick Swayze, her North and South co-star, and John Travolta, while always maintaining that neither situation crossed into an affair. She framed her choice to stay in the marriage as long as she did around a belief that marriage was something you were supposed to work hard at, not something you walked away from at the first sign of difficulty. After the divorce, Stevenson kept working in television, taking guest roles on shows like The Love Boat and Hotel, and later landing the recurring Baywatch role as Craig Pomeroy. He also appeared as the school director on Netflix's Greenhouse Academy across all 4 of its seasons, and reunited with his old Hardy Boys co-star Pamela Sue Martin for a holiday film years later. He eventually remarried. His wife, Lisa Chun, works as a chef and television personality, and the two have been married since 2018, building a life that, by most accounts, suits the quieter version of Stevenson that fame never quite managed to overwrite. Despite the divorce, Stevenson and Allie reportedly stayed connected, primarily through their children. True became a father in 2016, making both Stevenson and Allie grandparents, and Lily's son followed several years later. According to the people closest to them, co-parenting eventually settled into something workable, even if friends wasn't quite the right word for what they became. Then came December 5, 2022. Kirstie Alley died at 71, at the Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida, after what her children described as a battle with a cancer that had only recently been discovered. True and Lily released a statement calling their mother fierce, loving, and full of an unmatched zest for life, framing her death as sudden in the truest sense, a diagnosis and a loss compressed into a short and brutal span of time. Tributes arrived almost immediately from people who had crossed paths with her over 4 decades in the industry. John Travolta, her Look Who's Talking co-star and fellow Scientologist, called their bond one of the most special relationships of his life. Jamie Lee Curtis, who had worked with Allie on Scream Queens, wrote that the two of them had agreed to disagree on plenty but always kept mutual respect and a real connection. Kelsey Grammer, her Cheers co-star, said he had always believed grief over a public figure was a private matter, but allowed that he had loved her. Ted Danson described watching an old Cheers episode and laughing at her performance just as hard as he had 30 years earlier, hours before learning, after stepping off a plane, that she had died. And then there was Stevenson's response, which was the shortest of all of them and, in its way, the most quietly loaded. He posted a photo of the two of them together, an old image of Allie with her hand curled into the front of his shade, and wrote a brief caption addressed directly to her. He told her he was grateful for their years together, and for the 2 children, and now the grandchildren, that had come out of that time. He closed it simply. She would be missed. With love, from Parker. No long retrospective. No attempt to explain the marriage or relitigate the divorce in public. Just gratitude, stated plainly, by a man who had spent more than 2 decades building an entirely separate life, and still felt the loss enough to say something. That wasn't quite the end of what Stevenson had to say. Nearly a year later, in a November 2023 interview with Closer, he spoke again, this time with a bit more room to reflect on what her death had actually meant for their family. He called it a real tragedy that she hadn't been around longer, especially for their children, and added that while True and Lily were doing fine, nobody is ever fully prepared to